Welcome back. All right, so what order am I doing these in? Because I know people are asking. So what I've got is I've got 32 logos I grabbed because I was like, I want to use these logos for this, and I'm using the biggest logos first to make sure that they all fit. There are times where I do playlists and I get the whole board set up, and I don't use the biggest logo for when I'm setting it up, and that's a problem. So I'm just going. That's the order I'm doing it in. So there you go. Spoiler alert. So yeah, and there are times where I can shift it around, but that's why we're at Anaheim, because for the Anaheim Ducks, I'm using one of these big 3D bad boys there. These are absolutely fantastic. But at any rate, let's talk about the Anaheim Ducks and forget about the magnet for a while, shall we? The Anaheim Ducks had a ridiculously bad season. So I talked about Columbus earlier today. They had a bad season. I also used the same kind of magnet for them. But again, with Anaheim, this was unexpected. Now, no one expected Anaheim to be a playoff team this past season, but this was miserable. 23, 47, and 12, 32nd overall. And they're not a team that went through the same level of injuries as some of the other teams that we can say, well, injuries had a big effect there. This just was a nightmare from start to finish. So, goals scored per game, 2.51. That is way too low. Goals against, 4.09. Flirting with 80s numbers with goals against there. So this is an issue that needs to be resolved at both ends of the ice. And I think for Pat Verbeek, it is quite the challenge he has here. The power play, 15.7%. Not good. Penalty kill, also not good. 72.1%. So, I mean, there's lots of room for improvement. So there's that. You can look at it from a positive perspective of, well, it can't be that bad again, much like I said with Columbus earlier. But for Anaheim, this is getting kind of tiresome, isn't it? Because they last made the playoffs in 2018. Now we're looking at the 2023-2024 season. Highly unlikely to make the playoffs there. So, as I've been saying recently, it feels like now rebuilds are probably going to take longer than they used to. I think in part because the league just keeps growing, right? 2017 was the last time they won a round, and they last won a Stanley Cup, their only Stanley Cup, in 2007. So, a long time since that 2007 team, and we'll see whether or not they can get back to that glory under Pat Verbeek. Now, their cap space issue, well, honestly, it looks like they have a ton of space, but they don't. $16,635,833 according to Cap Friendly, but both Trevor Zegras and Jamie Drysdale are restricted free agents currently. Drysdale's not going to make a ton of money, probably a bridge deal, but it's still going to be probably, I think, what, $2.5 million a year, maybe, that kind of thing. And then Zegras, since Terry's at $7 million, you would think Zegras probably a little bit higher than that. The potential is still there with Zegras. The potential's off the charts with Zegras. So really, this contract is huge and an absolutely gigantic negotiation for general manager Pat Verbeek, and we'll see how things work, because Zegras was their number one scorer, in part because Terry missed some games. But Zegras played 81 games, 23 goals, 42 assists, 65 points. And he's a dynamic player. The points totals do not tell you the whole story with Zegras. As his teammates get better, his totals will get better. Troy Terry, 70 games, also 23 goals for him to go with 38 assists for 61 points. By Terry's standard, that's probably a little bit below where he wants to be. Now he's got his long-term extension with the Ducks, and we'll see if that makes him a little more comfortable. Cam Fowler, one of the more underrated players right now, 82 games, 10 goals, 38 assists, 48 points. You need that steadying influence when you're going through a rebuild. You need at least a few veterans sprinkled throughout the lineup who can help the kids out, and Fowler's absolutely that guy in the blue line. Mason McTavish, 80 games, 17 goals, 26 assists, 43 points. You have to think of the guys on this board. Both Zegras and McTavish are going to see pretty decent jumps in their point totals. Of course, with Zegras, we can come back to the restricted free agent status. He has two options here. He can either not show up to camp and hold out waiting for a contract, or he could say, I'm going to go over and play in Europe, making things a little more complicated. But at any rate, hopefully Zegras gets signed before training camp starts, or right after training camp starts. We don't have to worry about that, because that would be a huge void to fill in the lineup. Although there's some guys coming up, right? Frankie Vatrano, 81 games, 22 goals, 19 assists, 41 points. Vatrano, an excellent forward. Depth forward, absolutely, but he can score you 20 goals in a season, and I've always been very impressed with Frank Vatrano, dating back to his days in Boston. Still didn't understand why Boston lost him. In net, things are interesting because, of course, John Gibson, there were rumors during the summer that he's never going to play another game in Anaheim. He and his agent denied those rumors immediately. So Gibson's been clear that he's willing to still play for Anaheim in the event that they're not able to trade him. I think he'd still like to get traded. So it's It's one of those situations where he's willing to go back and play there, but when you look at his numbers, they're not doing him any favors. 53 games, 14, 31 and 8 record, 899 save percentage. Stolarz, who was good, 19 games, a record of 5-6 and 0, 899 save percentage as well. So you have two good goaltenders, both below 900. And then Dostal was very good, but his record not very good. 4-10 and 3 in 19 appearances, 901 save percentage. So Dostal should be the backup this year as Klang continues to make his way towards likely being the next guy to graduate to the NHL out of their goaltending ranks. Eriksson got into one game. He lost that game in extra time, and he had an 872 save percentage in that one game. So 4 different goalies in the net, but the focus is on Gibson and making that Gibson trade happen. So you've got Zegras unsigned, you've got Drysdale unsigned, you've got Gibson status unknown. There are so many question marks around an Anaheim team that was already 32nd in the league last year. So at any rate, they need to figure this out, right? Now, the channel's vote says you guys aren't optimistic they're going to turn things around and jump to the top. So 1% of the channel accidentally voted first or second. 4% of the channel voted third or fourth. 22% said fifth or sixth in the division. So again, the Pacific Division, there are some weak teams there. I can understand people thinking, well, they should bounce back and finish sixth in the division. Seventh or eighth, 73%. So almost 3/4 of the vote said, yeah, they're still one of the two worst or the worst team in the division. And I would tend to agree with that. However, they looked like they were coming out of it in 2021, 2022, that maybe their worst seasons were behind them. Maybe this was just a really bad year, and next season they get back to like a 500 mark, right? So their hits leader was Max Jones, 110, at least amongst players who've come back. Simon Benoit led in both hits and blocked shots. He's still a free agent currently. Cam Fowler at 104 blocked shots. Now, posts, not very many posts hit by Anaheim Ducks players. This is where Anaheim fans say, well, they couldn't hit the net. McTavish, Leeson, and Silverberg all had 4 posts. This was a team that really struggled with generating offense. When you've got a power play that's at 15.7%, it puts fear into no one, and it makes things that much more difficult on the rest of your team because guys aren't shy about taking penalties when your power play is that mediocre. So looking at the next one, Leo Carlsson is the next one. Leo Carlsson could make a huge difference. So you need to have Zegras signed, you need to have Drysdale signed and healthy, and then Leo Carlsson to hit the ground running. And who knows what might happen, right? And I'm not talking about playoffs, but at least a far more competitive and entertaining team to watch. But we'll see if Carlson's better suited in the NHL, the AHL, or playing overseas this year. For fantasy sleeper, I went with Mintyukov, who's a first-round draft pick who could push his way onto the blue line, onto the roster this year, and maybe get some special teams time. And it's unusual for me to pick a rookie, but I thought, why not? I'll throw a rookie on the board. We'll see how things turn out if he breaks camp with the team or not. The MVP, when he's on, it's Trevor Zegras. Trevor Zegras is the most valuable player. Troy Terry's right there with him. So between Trevor and Troy, they're the guys who run things up front. I will give an honorable mention as well to Cam Fowler because, again, I think he's underrated at this stage of his career. I can't remember ever seeing anything about Fowler wanting out, and he's been through some ugly seasons in Anaheim, so kudos to him for never coming out and saying, I'd like to go somewhere else. Again, I've talked about how as fans, and I think media as well, can understand when a player is frustrated after year after year after year of mediocrity, especially as they get further on in their career. And when a player doesn't complain about it and just does his job, keeps his head down and doesn't complain, I respect that. Now, their schedule is interesting. Their schedule in October, 6 out of 9 games are on the road. So Anaheim, who had trouble both at home and on the road, the schedule does not start out easy for them. So coming out of the first month, coming out of that October schedule, if they lose 7 out of those 9, we may be talking about Anaheim being out of the hunt early. And again, with the season they had last year, would it be surprising? No. Would it be disappointing? Absolutely. Definitely looking for some progression after that season that they had. So again, the Gibson trade has not been made as of yet. I had actually thought about saving Anaheim for right at the end because of Zegras and because of all this, but yeah, I did that already with the last time I did a 32-team look. So I don't see any point, and who knows, maybe this means Zegras gets done tomorrow, and maybe a Gibson trade comes through too, right? Now, the question mark too around Zegras is what he's worth and what he gets. And this is the question when it comes to contracts in the NHL. There are those who will look at the stats that the players put up, and then there are those who will look at the crystal ball of what the player may do in the future. And so it really depends on whether or not you look at Zegras and go, well, he's worth whatever 23 goals and 65 points are worth, or you look at Zegras and say, hey, this guy's going to be a 90, 95 point player at some point in his career. He deserves to be paid. Not necessarily at that rate, but you want to pay him a little bit more than you would for these points to try to make sure the contract's a bargain later on. So we'll see whether or not that gets done. Henrique and Silverberg are headliners amongst the UFAs next summer. Adam Henrique had a good year on a team that did not have a good year. And so if he has another good year and they find themselves out of a playoff position, and I mean well out of a playoff position, Henrique could be a good pickup for a team at the deadline. I think if he can have another year like last year, hey, it could be a really solid pickup. Cronin being in as coach, and he's talked about, his desire to make the playoffs. What else is a coach going to say? Coach isn't going to go in there and say, yeah, no, we're going to be really bad. I'm probably going to be having a beer during the game because it doesn't really matter. Bench kind of runs itself. How much coaching can I do when we're down 6-1 in the second period? So, I would love that kind of honesty. It's never going to happen. But at any rate, yeah, Cronin in as coach. We'll see how he does and how everything works with him. And it does feel like they needed a change behind the bench in Anaheim, right? Which may be a sign, too, that Pat Verbeek's going to have a little more expectation this year than he did this past season. Lundestrom being on LTIR to start does hurt their depth down the middle, hurts their depth up front, and so we'll see how that gets made up and which young player might come in. There are a lot of rookies who could play for this team. If I was to have an area where it was potential rookies, Anaheim would have a lot of players on that list. A lot of good young players, and I think now it's the time to build for Anaheim. They got Karlsson. They didn't get the number 1 draft pick, but they got number 2, and they feel like they got their player there. And Karlsson does project to be a top-line center who can score a bunch of points and be almost a franchise-level player. Now, the points percentage they recorded this year, which was .354, that is the lowest in the history of this team. And not particularly close in terms of when you're looking at those percentages. I think they had another one where they were like 398, one where they were barely over 400. But yeah, 354, that's got an odor to it. It's really, this can't happen again. They have to be better. The addition of good young players and, again, as long as Zegras is in the lineup, as long as Drysdale's healthy and in the lineup, because he missed most of the season this past year with injury, this team should be better. So they've had 5 straight seasons below 500. I've talked about the 500 mark. So, of course, in the National Hockey League, it's not the same as like you'd see in baseball or football. Overtime shootout losses don't count as a negative when it comes to your points percentage. So to be below 500, you have to lose a lot of games. And you have to lose a lot of games in regulation, not win very many. So for Anaheim fans, if you're feeling like, it's been quite the drought, you're not wrong. That's absolutely what this has been. I've stated before, I think part of it is that I haven't hated on the team like I did before the channel existed. And now that I've been to the pond a couple times and the tour I had there during our vacation was just fantastic. I really enjoyed that. I'm kind of rooting for them. And it feels weird. It really feels odd to say I'm kind of rooting for them. But after meeting some of the people behind this team and just hearing some of the stories when I was there, it's hard not to root for them. And to hear how alumni from the team are still around and they're still, passionately supporting the team, it's kind of hard not to root for them on some level, especially just with how bad this past season was. This year has to be better. The thing is, they could still improve by 10 to 15 points and not get out of 7th place in the division. That is a possibility. They should finish ahead of San Jose, I would think. But, I didn't have them finishing last overall this past season either. So there are at least a few question marks with this team, and it feels like when you're talking about Gibson and Zegras especially, those are huge question marks on what's going to happen going forward. But let me know your thoughts in the comments section below, as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. It's occurred to me, too, you may not be able to see the brim of this hat very well. So there you go, Wild Wing. So, all right. Thank you guys so much for all your support, as always. And again, let me know your thoughts. I will talk to you again soon.